When I first arrived in Guanabara Bay as a humble missionary, I despaired at the savages. They knew no God, lived in sin, and covered their bodies with unsightly tattoos. Even nature herself seemed appalled by their immorality. Hundreds of fish regularly washed ashore along the rivers, permeating the air with their rancid smell as they rotted under the sun. After a few months in this godless place, I had learned the native language well enough to begin spreading the faith through the jungle. This is where I met Arariboia, the chief of the Maracajá. I initially believed all Tupi to be the same. However, as I spent time with the chieftain over the years, I realized my judgment had been made in haste. Despite being a heathen, Arariboia was a man of honor. He had a genuine interest in the good book and would go to great lengths to protect his tribe. The Tupi were divided into countless factions with leaders both noble and wicked, much like the feuding kings of Europe. Arariboia's nemesis was a stubborn warrior named Cunambebe. His tribe fought the Portuguese at every turn and hated anyone who collaborated with them. Their rigid defiance earned them the moniker, the Old Ones. In contrast, Arariboia traded with the settlers. While he could not deny the strength of his rival, he believed Cunambebe was on a fool's errand. The arrival of the Portuguese had changed everything, and the Maracajá stood to gain by treating them as partners rather than enemies. The Europeans brought valuable knowledge and goods, but Arariboia envisioned a future where his people and the Portuguese coexisted and thrived in peace, learning from each other's cultures instead of perishing in futile conflicts. This made the Maracajá a target for relentless raids by Cunambebe. Each attack was devastating, but Arariboia fiercely defended his people. Whispers in the wind spoke of a grand scheme by Cunambebe, no mere raid, but an invasion to annihilate the Maracajá once and for all. Arariboia paid no heed to these murmurs, and when the first attackers were spotted, it seemed just like another raid. As before, Arariboia was prepared to fight tooth and nail for his people's home on the island, and to drive off these pesky raiders. Despite his decades of experience, Arariboia made the mistake of a young warrior by vastly underestimating his enemy. Instead of averting the crisis, he had led his people deeper into it. Skulking through the jungle, bitter and disappointed, he fantasized about shooting a poisoned arrow straight through Cunambebe's heart. Still, he knew that revenge would have to wait. The survival of his tribe was all that mattered now. They had to escape before Cunambebe caught up to them. As he led his men towards the edge of the island, Arariboia swore that this would not be the last time they saw their home. Arariboia had not chosen this corner of the island as a refuge on a whim. There was a Portuguese trading post here, one he and his father had often visited in his youth. They offered fine metal tools for trade and, perhaps, a safe haven for his tribe. If only he had something to trade for his people's freedom. But what could he offer? Was it even wise to bargain with these powerful foreigners from a position of weakness? As Cunambebe's shouts of "traitor" echoed in his ears, his desperation threatened to overwhelm him. He pushed his doubts aside as the trading post came into view between the trees. If his own people deemed him a traitor, so be it. Better that they stay alive and angry than dead and silent. With bravery and skill, and not a little help from the Portuguese cannons, the Maracajá had survived. With their foothold secured, Arariboia drew up plans to strike back at Cunambebe. Yet he knew he couldn't do it alone. The unlikely alliance with Mãe de Sá had been a success. The Pale Commander had fought viciously, tipping the scales in Arariboia's favor. Without him and his ships, the Maracajá would have been like the stranded fish, rotting on the shores of Guanabara Bay. Could Disa be trusted? For now at least, he seemed to be a man of his word. A warrior in hard metal and soft silk, rather than feathers and tattoos, but a warrior nonetheless. A few days after their victory, Disa invited him to a formal dinner. Stepping into the fort's mess hall felt like entering a strange new world. Everything was foreign, from the spiced dishes and silver plates to the little spits they used to pick up their food. A new fashion even amongst the Portuguese, Disa told him. Yet the conversation flowed pleasantly. My translator Anchieta tells me you have a proposal, said Disa, pausing for me to relay his words in Tupi. But just as Arariboia was about to reply, a messenger bursts into the hall. Governor General! Our men have sighted French ships in the bay! Disa dropped his fork. How many cannons? When the answer came, the foreigner went even paler than he already was. The French? Who are they? Arariboia asked. Disa replied in hushed tones. They are to us what Kunambebe is to you. Arariboia had assumed all Europeans were the same, but the arrival of the French made him realize his error. They had come to wrest control of the coast from the Portuguese no matter the cost, or so their commander boasted. Nicolas Duron was the very caricature of the adventurous European. He spoke in melodies, and his gleaming rapier danced through the air with each dramatic gesture. Arariboia had known many such men, all bark, no bite. Don't let his theatrics fool you, Disa warned him. Duron is a dangerous man. He has fought the Ottomans across Europe and Africa, and now he has come to establish a colony he calls France Antarctique. The names of these distant peoples and places meant little to Arariboia, but Disa's concerned look spoke volumes. Duron and the French were an immediate threat. That makes my plan even more urgent, Arariboia said. He presented his proposal with such speed and conviction that I found myself scrambling to keep up with the translation. The Maracajá and the Portuguese each faced an enemy intent on their destruction. Divided, they would both lose, but together, they could weather the storm. A long-term alliance, a partnership, if you will, between the Portuguese and the Maracajá. That is my proposal. The Governor General eyed him with an expression that was impossible to read. Perhaps in that moment he saw Arariboia's true character. This was not a man content to be a mere tool. He was a true leader, a general, a visionary, an equal. Then a partnership it will be, came his reply. Your tribe will help rid these Frenchmen from my doorstep, and in return, I will lend you my full support against Kunambebe. From this day forth, the Portuguese and the Maracajá's fates are intertwined. The alliance was sealed with a handshake. Yet, the waves of fate rarely allow for smooth sailing. France Antarctique, Mainsa laughed as he toasted Arariboia at their shared celebration. Only a flamboyant Frenchman would come up with such a name. Arariboia chuckled, even though he didn't fully understand Disa's boasting. They had won a small but significant battle, and their alliance had passed its first major test. That was reason enough to celebrate. Ultimate victory was far from certain, though. The pact between Duron and Kunambebe had caught them off guard, and their combined strength remained a frightening prospect. Still, Arariboia and Mainsa had something their enemies lacked: trust. Duron would abandon his native allies in a heartbeat if it served his purposes. Meanwhile, Kunambebe despised all Europeans, even if he had stooped to using one to fight another. It was a weakness Arariboia intended to exploit. As we Portuguese like to say, one swallow does not make a summer. a toast to our continued success. The swashbuckling Duran was a loose cannon, and worse, he was armed with enough gunpowder to blow the Portuguese galleons to smithereens. Sa and Arariboia would have to deal with him before they could take on Cunhambebe. The Frenchman had not been idle, however. After his defeat on the coast, he had relocated to a small, defensible island. There, he began constructing a formidable stone fortress he called Fort Coligny. Once his cannons were installed, the fort would be nearly impregnable. Arariboia grew restless. The longer we wait, the more prepared our enemies will be. We should strike as soon as possible. If we surprise them, we can dictate the pace of the battle. They readied their men for an attack that very night. It was hard to see today's accomplishments as a victory. Fort Coligny lay in ruins, and Cunhambebe's warriors had been driven back, but at a terrible cost. All the Portuguese cannon ships had been sunk. His allies' greatest advantage, their firepower, was now lost. The Sa had called it a Pyrrhic victory, but Arariboia was too occupied by his gloomy thoughts to ask what that meant. Had he been a fool to ally with the Portuguese? He could have led his tribe into the jungle after they lost their home. Instead, they were fighting and dying for the foreigners in a war that wasn't even theirs. Cunhambebe's accusation of traitor echoed in his mind, and for the first time, he began to believe it. "Reinforcements are on their way from Portugal," the Sa told him as they considered their options. "I do not know when they will arrive. All we can do is wait. When you are caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, there is no escape." When it rains, it pours. And it was certainly pouring for Arariboia and Sa. The relentless Duran had already regrouped at a new fort. Nearby, Cunhambebe's army was gathering in greater numbers than ever before. Their target was the crown jewel of the Portuguese colonies, the burgeoning town of Rio de Janeiro. Capturing Rio would spell disaster for both Portuguese and Maracajá. It was all coming to a head. If Mãe de Sá was forced to surrender, Arariboia's tribe would not survive. Despite Arariboia's gloom, it was nothing compared to the Sá, who suddenly appeared much paler and older. "We have no cannons, few weapons, and fewer men. Our only advantage is the one we create, so let us make one." "On days like these, I wish I had your resilience," the Sá replied. "I will follow your lead, Chief Arariboia. Bring us our final victory." The alliance between Arariboia and Mãe de Sá, which once seemed so fragile, had proven to be as resilient as Brazil would. Not one to linger on his failures, Nicolas Duran picked up the pieces of his broken expedition. As he set sail for new horizons, he denounced his former ally. "If only I had allied with a man like Arariboia and not this Cunhambebe, this anchor around my neck, then everything would have been different." Cunhambebe, for his part, fled into the jungle as soon as the tide turned. Arariboia did not pursue him. The humiliation of his nemesis and the return of his people to their home was vengeance enough. Mãe de Sá praised Arariboia's efforts to the Portuguese king, who rewarded the chieftain by knighting him for his services. The Maracajá received written guarantees that their homeland would forever be theirs. In gratitude, Arariboia adopted the faith of his allies. When he laid down his bow for the final time, Arariboia felt a profound sense of relief. He had saved his people from destruction. After so many years in exile, they could finally rest and rebuild, knowing that their children would grow up in peace on the island they called home.